A hearty good morning to one and all present here. We'll be starting the second session of this ARC Teachers in Ophthalmology. This session is on skill enhancement. So can I have the chairpersons here, please? Dr. Kamaljit Singh. Dr. Kamaljit Singh, are you here? Dr. G. Thiruvengada Senthil Kumar, please sir, please come and have a seat. Dr. Paneer Selvam. Dr. Paneer Selvam. Dr. Muralidhar, please sir, please come and have a seat. We have the keynote address by Dr. Sunil Morekar. He'll be talking on formative assessment in the clinic using the OSECs.
I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity, but there's a slight change I'm making here because I just came to know about the topic and then I'm talking on this right now. So there's something I had ready with me about teaching in the clinic, so I'll start with that. So as you will see, I have a lot of slides ready with me all the time, so I can start talking. Dr. Sunil. Session 2 ना?
ये ना?
नहीं, ये तो Session 4 वाला है. मैंने अभी दिया ना?
May I ask the next speaker to be also ready?
Yeah.
The next speaker is Dr. Nahid Akhtar. Are you here, ma'am?
नहीं. नहीं, मैंने आपको बाद में दिया ना? वहाँ पे दिख रहा है.
The topic of the prescribing OPD, earmarked by Dr. Nahid Akhtar. He is available there. Just option, Dr. Okay. Yes. Dr. Anuradha Chandra is available, and Dr. Sheikh Ahmad Zagi.
So maybe
We can.
we'll go to the next topic then.
Proficiency
By
in
the time
diagnostics.
Dr. Sunil Morekar is ready, we'll start the next debate, that is on proficiency in diagnostics, all equipment versus the common equipment. Dr. Anuradha Chandra will be speaking on all equipments.
Hello everybody, very good morning and thank you to the organizers for, it's not coming there? So I have very few points to make. Okay, what I am speaking about is having multiple instruments and the advantages of having multiple instruments instead of a one equipment in your OPD. So the points I am going to make is very simple. Time efficiency. If you have multiple instruments, like you have 100 patients waiting in a line in a hospital where you have all types of patients coming to you, you would like to have multiple machines at your door. If you have only one machine, so every patient you are taking 10 minutes and the other patients are standing in the line. So it will be 1,000 minutes to do 100 patients and the machine is going to get disrupted. So if you have a manometer, a manual keratometer, an OcuScan and a IL master working at the same time, you can cater to multiple patients at the same time and increase the patient satisfaction and become time efficient. Next is quality of reporting. If you think of the reporting, and there is a recent study in ARVO which tells you that they had used first time users using manual keratometer and IOL master, and they compared it, and they found that there was not much of a statistical difference between the first time users and a user who has been using for maybe 20 years. So it is important to understand that just having a manual keratometer and not having an IOL master is not going to make much difference once you are accurate in your measurements. Second is high maintenance. If you have a third is high maintenance, because if you have a one equipment doing multiple functions, usually they are very highly sophisticated instruments and they require a lot of maintenance. Speaking of OCT spectralis, HRA spectralis, and HRA OCT combined, these machines are very, very sophisticated, and using them, rough use is always going to create problems. Next is cost benefit analysis. Many a times what happens is that once you have a machine which does multiple functions, you tend to over prescribe diagnostics. And it comes because you have a OCT which also does a macula and a OCT angiography, and you think, why not I do a OCT angiography together? So this is to summarize, it is time efficient if you have multiple equipments in your hand. The difference in quality of reporting is not much different. High maintenance cost is there because these machines are very sophisticated, and cost benefit analysis goes for it cost to the patient if you have very high sophisticated machines. So you have to balance between the two. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The common equipments will be spoken by Dr. Sheikh Mohammed Zakir. Is Dr. Nahid Akhtar here?
Dr. Pramod Bende is here. Dr. Pramod. Okay, that's fine, sir. Dr. Shakshi Prabha Prasad. Okay.
At the outset, I would like to thank the AIOS and the ARC for having given me this opportunity to speak on this topic, proficiency in diagnostics, all equipment versus the common equipment. I am assistant professor at the AMU Institute of Ophthalmology. I have no financial disclosures in all the products shown here. The Cambridge Dictionary says, what is proficiency? It means great skill, ability and expertise. And here we are discussing about proficiency in diagnostics. In other specialties, it's very simple. We need hardly few equipment for most of the cases. It's very simple. But here, for ophthalmic examination, it's not so simple. There's a plethora of equipment available. You can see here, huge list, and many more. And day by day, we are getting more and more equipment. For ophthalmology residents and fellows, comprehensive training during residency or DNB or fellowship program is essential because they have to learn the field in toto. The eye is a specialized sense organ with multiple disciplines. And the examination is totally equipment based. Almost, if not totally, if most of the examination is equipment based. So there's a need for personal equipment to learn. and master the ophthalmic examination and diagnostic skills. Without personal equipment, it is not possible because we have to master. Here we have from the basic to the high-end equipment. A simple one can, I think, help. For slit lamp fundus examination, I have shown here 3 lenses with advantage of one over the other. Some has good points, some has some inferior points, but I think the central one will be sufficient enough for most of the cases. And if the resident is proficient in using the equipment, in using the lens, he can see most of the findings that he wants to see. Similarly, for indirect ophthalmoscopy, I think again the central lens, you can see the field that's in the 20 diopter lens, in the 30 diopter lens, and there's a compromise in between giving advantages of both. We have other lenses also. How many can we buy? There are basic to advanced and fancy designs coming out every year. I think a simple one can help. For glaucoma evaluation, actually we have to look at the angle. This is one, and here is also one, and there is third here. But I think the best and the simplest, especially for the Indian eyes, sunken eyes, this is sufficient. A single mirror or a 2-mirror lens. I should say 2-mirror gonio. For the recording of intraocular pressure, the Goldman, still the gold standard. Newer designs and newer models are coming up, and newer tonometers are there, but I think one is sufficient. It gives the best results till now. For examination of patients with problems of oculoplasty, here we have the hurdles, the lutes, and I think even this can work if I am proficient enough in using the equipment. Similarly, a scale over here, a transparent ruler. What do we actually need for the specialty evaluation? For the case of glaucoma, we need stereoscopic optic disc evaluation. We need to do the gonioscopy, the applanation tonometry, and periodic field assessment. For patients with diseases of the retina, we need to see the slit lamp biomicroscopy examination of the posterior pole, indirect ophthalmoscopy for the peripheral fundus, and some cases require OCT and fundus fluorescein angiography. So I think having the common equipment at hand, Madam has made my job easy. She told some of the weak points about the topic which she was discussing. I again come back and conclude. It's economical having few equipment, the common one. It's easy to expertise, and I can take care of my equipment. I have few things, and I have personal attachment with my equipment, my lenses. The ones that I purchased during my residency, I still have them. And in this scenario of limited resources, there's equitable distribution of the limited resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Dr. Sunil Morekar is ready with his keynote address.
I should say I'm back, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Oh, I'm not back. I'm like that. So as I said, I'm just making a slight change. I'll be talking about teaching PBL and assessing the same thing with an OSCE in the same setting. So I have ICO to thank for and International Association of Medical Science Educators to thank for. And I'll just run through a couple of people I have to thank. So it's FIMER, from where we have learned quite a bit of this. The GSNC FIMER, with which we had done University of Nebraska, Michigan, University of Michigan, and the webinar workshops which ICO has been conducting, Harvard Medical School, NHS University of Birmingham, and the International Association of Medical Science Educators. So besides that, Toronto and other places from which we've done. So let me tell you one thing, whenever we start with any presentations, we have to have our objectives there. So this is something that is not very nice. I have put in 9 objectives and it's not smart. So they're supposed to be smart objectives, and when we are assessing the student, it is the objectives on which we are assessing them. So my objective was something, and my assessment should be whether I have been able to deliver something, and I have to figure out whether the student has learned it. If there are mismatched objectives, the student wants to learn something else and I want to teach something else, there's going to be a problem. So what are we diagnosing when we are using the OSCEX, when we are using the clinical examination in the clinic, the objective clinical examination? We know that teaching is not equal to learning, and learning is not equal to competence, and competence is not equal to performing. So I may have been teaching somebody, but it's not necessary that the person learned it. It's also not necessary that the person who's learned it is competent in it. I might have learned something, but I might still not be competent in it. And even if I'm competent, I may not actually be able to perform it. So the whole thing here is what we are trying to assess in the clinic is problem-based learning. So we have to teach them how to diagnose a problem and solve the problem. Professional competence is defined as habitual and judicious use of all of these skills, communication skills, knowledge skills. So this is what you're trying to assess in a student. So what these doctors, as people, we come out into the public, we need knowledge, we need ability to elicit information, interpersonal skills to respond to people. So the types of curricula that we integrate, it's problem-based learning, task-based learning, hot case learning, and each of these can be then assessed in a very objective, structured way by asking specific questions. What we need to do here is, before we do this, we need to plan the session. We need to plan what questions I'm going to ask based on what is there in front of me during the session when the person is in the clinic. So this is something that you're going to learn in the clinic, and this is what you're going to assess in the clinic. And afterwards, once the clinic is over, you still have to follow it up with a feedback and a reflective session, because unless you reflect, you're not going to learn anything about it. So you have to reflect for the next session, then the next examination, and the next thing that you are going to do. So these are examinations, small structured examinations, like we have the OSCE in the DNB. This is something that you're going to do in the clinic. So you've got to be prepared with it. You've got to learn what the student has learned and not learned, and what he has not learned is the focus of your next, is the objective of your next teaching as well as assessment. So teaching and assessment will go hand in hand. One thing without the other doesn't really make sense. So let's do it. Now, pitfalls in clinical education are many, so I'm going to run through a couple of slides. There are many challenges for teachers. The teacher's objectives are many. You have to have positive attitude, friendly, role modeling. All these things will be something that will be necessarily seen by the student and emulated by the student. So I'm just going to run through those things. There are many teaching styles. There are traditional lectures, mini talk, but what we're talking about, back to the bedside. The bedside is something where you need to be ready with some preparation. In the bedside, you're going to do the demonstration model. You're going to introduce the subject. So I'll come to an example later on. So this is drab. This is something that, this is what I'm trying to demonstrate, is this is not the way we really want to do things. I will come to the clinical examination. So between traditional and modern methods, we actually don't do these didactic lecture things, because that's something that's going to happen. The student is going to walk out of it. The mind is going to walk out of it. So the newer concepts are going to be self-directed learning. We give them something like a flipped classroom. You tell them that tomorrow's OPD is going to be something like this, and you expect some questions here. The OPD is supposed to be a retina OPD, so be prepared with retina questions and retina cases. The need should be felt, and there should be active participation. And each one of them is capable of original critical thinking. So we are focusing on core competencies. So the core competency here is going to be problem solving. And why problem solving? Because this is something that you are going to do in life, and they are going to do that in life later. So when you are doing this, you define the problem, you formulate a hypothesis about it, strategize for the assessment. So when you are forming your OSCEX, You got to think that I want him to know at least at the level that the student is, if it's an undergraduate versus a postgraduate versus a fellow. So I will talk in terms of oculoplasty. So if I am talking about lids at a level of undergraduate, I want them to identify whether it's an entropion or ectropion, whether it is a trichiasis or an entropion. So that is what I'm going to assess. At the level of a resident, I'm going to assess whether he knows how to evaluate and figure out what are the different types of entropion, ectropion. And at a fellow level, I'm going to ask him questions like, what is it that you see here? Do you see a vertical lid laxity? Do you see horizontal lid laxity? How is this going to be important in what surgical strategy you are going to adopt? So you got to reflect on what you are going to ask in the OSEX, and then you got to formulate and define that problem for you. And you got to teach that to the student, let them devise a hypothesis, and then strategize for your assessment. Then you come down to, you narrow diagnosis in the entropion, you narrow down your diagnosis in what the student's problem is. So what is he not understanding? So he's not understanding a particular thing, I'm going to reflect on that and come back with an OSEX. So the advantage is that you get a holistic view. There are disadvantages. It's very difficult to do this kind of a thing in your busy practice. The role of the teacher here is just an initiator and a hard worker. And you do what is called as a Socratic method. So you open up, so when you're doing your OSEX, you do the Socratic method, you throw up a broad question. So you make the broad question. The Socratic method is where you are making the student think through, so it's a formative assessment, so you're making the student think through your questions. So you throw a broad question. You say, what do you think is the problem in this particular case? Why is he watering? So is it excess watering, or is it some entropion, ectropion, or trichiasis? Then you narrow down the question. You don't give leading questions, but you narrow down. So what do you think in the lid is seen? What do you think about positions of the lid? What do you think about laxity? And then you go down and narrow down your questions, and you will be able to figure out how is the student being formed. So you know that the concepts are there. So I'll come to that. So your issue here is you want to promote reflective thinking and critical thinking through your questions. So your questions are such that makes the student think. So while you are constructing questions for a guided inquiry, use your verbs very carefully. So you use your verbs according to the Bloom's taxonomy, and you aim them at cognitive, affective, and psychomotor skill assessment, each one of them. So can you demonstrate this? Can you just show me? And then you break it into part. Did he introduce himself to the patient? Was he courteous? Then you are assessing all the skills that I spoke about. The professional skills, the communication skills, the soft skills, and all of that is in an objective format with you. And that is what you are trying to assess. There are student skills, the ability to gather knowledge, analyze the information, indulge in scientific, logical reasoning. This is what you are trying to assess through something that you've made. So OSEX is something that you got to make. You can't pick up an OSEX from an internet. I think that's a very wrong thing to do. So each one of us has to make that OSEX at that particular time. I could make an OSEX for you right now if you tell me what needs to be done. So you have to prime the learners as to what is expected out of them. What is it that I'm going to ask you? And you're not going to penalize it, because this is not summative assessment, this is formative assessment. You're trying to learn what you're teaching them is being learned, or what concepts are being picked up. And then you have to do modeling. So you have to show them, see, I am doing this, so you are the model. So it's a very busy slide, but that's what you do. You ascertain the learner's analysis of the case by modeling as to show him what is your analysis of the case. And then you have to give them feedback and look at whether he has attained concept. So concept attainment, so concepts are learned by seeing examples and counter examples. So you're necessarily supposed to give them a counter example. You know, this is entropion, so what do you think would be in an ectropion? So what do you think would be a case where it's not watering because of a lid problem? So it would be something where there's over-secretion because of some other issues. So you give examples, counter-examples, and then you match between them. And then you make the students reflect. So you do concept maps. So you try to find out whether the person has understood a concept, and you have a focus question. The concept map consists of a focus question of prepositions, and then the concepts are joined by linking phrases. So this is how you form your question. And there is a hierarchical structure, and then you cross-link. So you find out, go to the basic concepts. So I will talk about basic concepts about positions of the lid. Then I will talk about lid in terms of eyelashes and the lid, in terms of the physiology of the lid. Then I will go to the pathology and then to the medical problem. So I will cross-link this, that he's understood the medical problem. I will go back to whether he is correlating this with the anatomy. So the anatomical concepts are clear, the pathological concepts are clear, and then the surgical concepts are clear. So there's cooperative learning here, where you can make them into groups of 4, and you have to have a good student paired with a not so good student. There is nothing called as a bad student, and you have to give them some autonomy. And the essential prerequisites are teamwork, and the methods are cooperative. You can do peer-to-peer, so you can ask one student to do an OSCE on the other one and tell him, what do you think? Where are his concepts? So if it's a better student, you tell him, what are his concepts, and can you help him out? It's sometimes that the not so better student tells you things about the better student which you didn't realize. You have to have simulations. Now, giving an example, there are times when students, I have asked them what is a ophthalmic condition with red eye. So most of the times what you want them to understand is concept mapping and to create a problem-based learning methodology. If I just tell them what are the causes for red eye, this is what they give me: conjunctivitis, non-infectious conjunctivitis, keratitis. So this is something that I used to do, and instead of that, if I have this, so is there pain? What are the causes in which you have pain? So in my undergraduate days, I as a student, I was asked a question, what are the causes of hepatosplenomegaly? And I said there are 48 causes of hepatosplenomegaly. And I came up to 46, and then I wasn't able to say the last 2, and I was failed. This is nonsense. I mean, I said 48 causes. He said, you didn't say malaria and Kala Azar. So the most commonest causes were kept by me at the end. So I have a list of things. That is not what you want to know. You want to know what is this patient right now. Can you split these causes according to what? Is there a vision loss? Is there pain? So what things you would think of? Is there vision loss? Next. So what is it the first that you are going to think about? And this is what you are going to incorporate in your OSCE. So can you formulate 4 questions that you're going to ask the patient? Can you tell me what are the 4? So I'm going to ask pain, vision loss. What is the position of those questions? Is pain going to be the one that you're going to ask first? Pain versus no pain, and then you're going to ask vision loss. How is it going to happen? So are you forming your concepts? That is what you want to know, because this is the student being formed. And you're not trying to find out whether he knows something or doesn't know something. You're trying to help him learn that this is how I'm supposed to learn. I'm not supposed to learn a list of things. I'm supposed to decipher, make concepts, and try to get to a problem solving. Because effectively in life it is going to be problem solving. So then your questions will be problem-based learning questions, like a 48-year-old patient with contact lens use gets a leaf brush injury to the eye with contact lens on and presents the next day with a red eye and the diminishing. So the first thing, some of the good students come and tell me leaf injury, and they say it's a vegetative trauma and this is fungal ulcer. But you got a contact lens on. How will you get a fungal ulcer with a contact lens on? Right? So this contact lens was used where? So your mind is thinking in terms of a vegetative trauma and a fungal ulcer, but it is a contact lens related issue, and that's where you tell them by asking such framed questions which are based on the taxonomy. So I can ask you simple questions on the knowledge base, on the Bloom's technology. What is the percentage of blindness in India? I mean, this is just memory. Versus some question like this, which is a higher order question in the taxonomy, which is testing the cognitive skills of the student and whether he is learning in the right way. Or another question, 40-year-old male from Ghana with a sudden history of pain and vomiting present the next day. He is a patient of Ebola and now serologically cleared. So what do you think about, will you be able to touch his eye? So things like this. So now I'm asking him and making him think about, is Ebola secreted in tears? So the question should be formed in such a way that you don't lead the thing and tell him, you know, Ebola's tears are secreted in the, I will forget this. It's like, so this patient has come from Ghana and this is this. What do you want to do? And are you wearing the gloves when you're touching? So this patient is from Ghana and he's just seen a patient, he's just been in contact with, and you see him not wearing the gloves, this student of yours, you teach him everything, he's going to die in the next Ebola. Or he's going to get coronavirus from the next conjunctivitis from a patient if he doesn't elicit the history of China travel or conjunctivitis after the China travel, because conjunctivitis has been noted in some of these cases. So will you wear gloves? Will you wear a mask when you're seeing such patients like this? So these are skills, safety skills and skills which you want to understand, and so your OSCE should. So traditionally whatever is given about OSCE in the internet sites and everywhere is something which is just preliminary. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to lead you to where it should be. So you have the BMJ red eye model in which I have.
We're already running
Yeah.
out of time.
So some of the things here, so some of these are what I use in my OSEX. So some issues with Cox, and I've just, basically you set your own objectives. I'll just run through the slides now. Provide a good teaching environment. Your teaching environment and your examination environment and your assessment environment is the same. You bridge the gap between the student and you. You ensure good communication. Set good examples by role modeling. So I wear my gloves, so you know suddenly that he's wearing the gloves because it's a conjunctivitis patient. Involve the students. Observe the student, and this is where your observation gives rise to an OSEX. So you're observing the clinical and saying he wore the gloves, he did. So there are 10 things that you will observe there. So a typical day is like this, teaching and learning in a very small form, everything else more, but then this is how it should be. So it's a patient factory out there. You integrate your work. Your island of teaching is your island of tranquility. You want to expand that. And establish expectations, plan activities, give feedback, match the educational goals. So your educational goals were he should learn about dengue eye disease, but he's interested in cataract. You tell him that there might be a patient of dengue, so you find out from something that you've seen in Delhi. There was a case where dengue was operated, patient with cataract was operated and he had bleeding, and then we realized that he had dengue and the platelets had gone down, and the platelet counts was 7 days ago before the patient got the dengue. So this something like this, you try to attract his attention towards dengue and what has happened from the last blood test that the patient has done, right? So this is how, when you are the role model, be creative. And it works very well. So those are the steps. And feedback is something which is important, that you have to give the feedback at the right time. So once you've done the OSEX, you can't say I will give you the results some days later. You have to tell him the results just after that. So the clinic is over, just wait, I'll tell you what has happened in this OSEX. So teachable moments I'm not going to talk about. The whole thing is that you consider evolving yourself as an educator, grow yourself and try to incorporate OSEX, OSS, Oscars, everything in your this thing. And when an educational opportunity arises, continue with your evaluation finally. So this is the last slide. Your evaluation finally of your bedside teaching will be formative in terms of portfolio, summative in terms of direct observation, and finally an OSCE. The OSCE is something that your DNB does. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Is there something people want to ask? We don't have time for questions.
We request the speakers to tick on to the time schedule so that all speakers can get their opportunity, and also we have a sufficient time for the discussion. Please cooperate with us. So we invite the next speaker, counseling of patients by residents to do, by Dr. Muralidhar Ramappa, who will be speaking in the place of Dr. Pramod Binde.
Yeah,
Yes,
I just wanted to clarify. I was a last-minute entry into this thing.
Yeah.
Pramod couldn't
Most of the
make it.
speakers are in the last minute.
Pramod couldn't make it. And just a small correction, I'm not Muralidhar Ramappa, but I'm ST Muralidhar. That's the change that is there. Yeah. Okay. So, very good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. The topic is counseling of patients by residents. For a minute, I was wondering whether fresh residents or residents who have completed their post-graduation. I believe it's post-graduations and somebody who's in the third year of the residency who would be actually involved. So I would speak in favor of it. And if we go back and figure out what makes a good doctor, there was a Twitter survey in 2019 where they showed that empathy, although is the most important one, but competence stands fifth. Now, so you need these soft skills to explain to the patient about what is his problem, and you describe the details, the natural course, etc. So the purpose of all this is to establish a doctor-patient relationship. And so now, in this regard, we were actually trying to compare who should counsel, residents versus counselors who have actually been trained to counsel. So what we realized on a scale of 10, that the disease description is better by the residents than the counselors. The current status of the disease is better explained by the residents than the counselors. And you have the whole host of things. What we realized was costing and scheduling of whatever is the procedures or the treatment processes, the counselors are much better positioned to do it. Whereas most of the other descriptive elements are better put forth by residents. So on a scale of 10, we realized that 8 out of 10 parameters are better suited for the residents, and about 2 parameters, the counselors are better off. And why we need this? See, in the era where we have so much of violence against doctors and all those things, we had poor communication skills of the healthcare people as one of the major reasons. And so if you have an effective counseling, you can increase the treatment adherence, you can reduce the malpractice claims, you can have fewer tests and second opinions, and you can actually prevent misunderstanding, conflicts, etc. So clear pointers or technical details are better suited for the residents. In turn, the residents over time gather more confident attitudes and gain valuable inputs from when they speak about the disease to the patient. Non-physicians are better communicators regarding costs and further scheduling of whatever is the processes. So how can we combat this? Well, we have only one thing, that we try and incorporate patient counseling in the schedule of teaching so that they can be groomed as they come into the market. Now, I acknowledge some of the inputs were by Dr. Alankrita Muralidhar, who's doing a DNB fellow here at the Shroff Charity Eye Center. And so now I would eagerly wait to hear why not from my next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. You completed before time. Just for the record, the time for each speaker is 4 minutes, so please try to finish it by then. The next speaker is Dr. Shashi Prabha Prasad. He'll be speaking not to do counseling of patients by residents against the motion. Is Dr. Bhavna Khurana here? May I request you to be ready, please, in this podium? Is Dr. Nahid Akhtar here yet?
Yeah, madam, you can please go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. By counselor, I mean, like in ophthalmology, we hardly have counselor. We have organ donation counselor, we have eye donation counselor. Otherwise, we don't have counselor. I consider counseling faculty or the treating person or the consultants. So, Dr. Muralidhar has made my talk very difficult. There is a difference between fact and fiction, and there is what we practice and what we preach. There is a difference, lots of difference in that. And as he told us, it is a foundation of doctor-patient relationship. So counseling is a very important part of treatment. So patient comes to you, he's standing at a crossroads, he doesn't know what to do. So as a counselor, you have to tell him all the diagnosis, different modalities of treatment, and what all complications we can have. So we provide cafeteria approach. So ultimately, patient will decide what he wants, what type of treatment he wants. So counseling should be done without any ulterior motive. There should not be any personal interest involved. And we are not salesmen. We have to tell the truth. We had different counselors in mythology. Lord Krishna, he advised Arjuna, everything was right. Then we had Shakuni, he advised everything wrong to Duryodhan. Then we had Sanjay, he was a neutral counselor. He just described everything what was happening in the battlefield. So first thing is, residents have not seen enough cases. They have not come across many complications. So they don't have proper experience. They are still learning. Next is inexperience. They are still developing their communication skill. Their soft skills are still not developed. And sometimes they just think it is a routine work. They may not take it very seriously. Next is residents are at the peak of confidence. They don't have knowledge, but they are overconfident, and that is ignorance. Then patient will not have faith and trust. Counseling is a trust building measure. So I believe that treating consultant should themselves counsel the patient, not the residents. And ultimately accountability, it comes on the treating consultant, not on the resident. What all patients go to court? Those who have not been counseled properly. So it is a very important part of treatment. And in the court of law, residents have no standing. They have got only learner's license. Their main interest is to get lots of surgery. Like this is example, one doctor got MS surgery result. He said, results out, I got my license to cut. So that is the ultimate interest. So a good surgeon knows how to operate, a better surgeon knows when to operate, and the best surgeon knows when not to operate. Residents do as consultants are very busy, or they think they are very, very busy. If you entrust residents with counseling, it means you don't think it is important. We can't absolve ourselves and blame the resident. And just remember, no resident has ever been taken to court, only the treating surgeon or consultant. I had done some small study. I discussed with 50 participants from different specialties, and there were 2 questions asked. First question was, should residents be allowed to do the counseling? 86% said yes. And there was the next question, would you or your relative be willing to undergo counseling by residents? And to my surprise, answer was no. 96% said no. So we just see the difference. What you want something different, and you do give something different. So here I rest my case. I'm sorry, double standards don't work for me. To conclude, most important bridge between the patient and the treating doctor. It is wrong to leave the most important part of patient management to the residents, and we can do, but be prepared to face the consequences. In case of any eventuality post-surgery, we have to be surgeon safe. And patient will have more faith if you do counseling yourself instead of residents. And just remember, no resident has ever been taken to court. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. What about the counselors that we have in the hospital? Those who don't know anything about ophthalmology, they counsel.
We have got counselors, but they just counsel about organ donation and eye bank. Otherwise, we don't have counselors.
Like I have seen that many, even small hospitals today have counselor, and their basic aim is to increase the cost of the surgery. In the sense that if monofocal is needed, they would tell him to go on to a better surgery to multifocal. And many a time the indication has not been there, the surgeon does not know.
That is the main problem.
Yeah.
Even with residents also, because they have got some hidden interest. Sometimes these companies come and give them so many incentives, you give this lens, so that problem can be with residents also. So I don't prefer residents, I prefer counseling to be done by surgeon himself or herself. Thank you so much.
Can I make a small point actually? I think her point about whether the, the shoe fits the other foot. That's an interesting observation that, ma'am, you have actually made. I had a very different take on this one. I thought we were not talking about a solo practitioner kind of setup. We are more into teaching hospital kind of a setup.
Sir, in the college also, residents are there.
True.
They are just observing how we counsel the patient. But we cannot leave everything on the residents.
I agree.
And most of the time they are so busy in writing case sheets, doing rounds, that they take this thing also like routine work. They will just routinely, they will just counsel, they will not go into the minute details of the counseling. So that is what I have seen in my college.
I agree. I mean, but what I'm actually trying to stress
But we
is
cannot completely
yes.
absolve the responsibility of the residents from the
Sir,
counseling
they should do, but
aspects,
they should be under observation.
that your study that has been given. I don't know how far that is been logically correct because only 50. We can discuss at the end of the session.
Thank you,
surely,
sir.
madam.
Thank you, sir.
We can go ahead with the next topic, madam, please.
Topic of independent OPD patients for residents in favor for the residents to see independent patients. I would begin with a big yes, because the sole purpose of residency is to gear up for the real world, so a strong foundation is needed, where the residents need to be trained to see and treat patients independently under guidance. Especially ophthalmology being a clinical branch, clinical skills are essential, and just theory is not enough. So the study published in 2017 gives the definition of resident as a creative doctor in training whose skills have to be sharpened and mind fostered for better patient care, rather than a passive student whose duty is to serve the department and absorb knowledge in the process. Another study published in 2008 pointed a few fallacies of the current postgraduate programs, saying that it does not train the residents in modern ophthalmic examination, so they were not confident of independent practice. The Medical Council of India recommends that there is the goal of producing competent specialists who are expected to master most of the competencies to enable them to carry out their professional duties ethically. So does the International Council of Ophthalmology, which says that the preamble of the curriculum for education of an ophthalmic specialist is the objectives being designed to provide a structured program of learning that facilitates the acquisition of knowledge, understanding, skills, and attitudes to a level that is appropriate for ophthalmic specialists who have been fully prepared to begin their career as independent consultants in ophthalmology. So how do we prepare these independent consultants in a way that patients are not at risk, there is some form of supervision, and we reach a solution for the roadblocks? If the consultant supervises the resident completely, the residents are not completely self-confident, and the patient would also prefer to be seen by the consultant in the presence of the consultant. So what we can aim for is a guarded independence. So how do we reach this aim of guarded independence? There is a suggested solution for achieving these objectives. Starting with the first year of residency, in the first 6 months, we can start with an orientation program, which is known to lay a strong foundation stone so that eventually the goal of independent patients in the OPD can be achieved. Along with it, during the orientation program, it is reinforced that the residents should never dispose of patients without a proper plan of action, and should be able to identify the red flag special situations where they will never dispose of without consulting the senior. So the first 6 months, along with the orientation program, the resident should be spending 1 month in each specialty, along with observation of refraction in OPD. At the end of 6 months, they can conduct a practical class and demonstration on refraction, followed by a test on refraction. Hereafter, the goal of performing independent refraction is reached. In the next 6 months of the first year of residency, the residents can go on with an independent refraction, can sit in the OPD under guarded independence with the senior resident, can start observing procedures like applanation tonometry, gonioscopy, indirect ophthalmoscopy, slit lamp biomicroscopy, perimetry, biometry, ultrasound B-scan. For the OPD, the first 3 months, they only observe how the patients are being treated. The next 3 months, they can start seeing independent patients, minimum 10 patients that can be seen by them, and then discussed with the senior. The second year residency, the OPD is again with the senior resident. Beginning of second year, we can conduct a practical examination to test whether the diagnostic procedures which were observed in the last 6 months, whether the resident is certified competent enough to do them independently. If they are, they can start performing the diagnostic procedures. The study in 2005 claims that independent performance of diagnostic procedures is essential for resident training. For OPD patients, they can start seeing independent patients minimum 20, while the senior resident is on watch out while allowing independent patient, and they can intervene and take over whenever necessary. The third year residency, the first 6 months, the resident can sit with the senior consultant and see minimum 30 patients suggested. It is up to the consultant depending on the competence that the resident has achieved. The next 6 months, the last 6 months of the residency, the resident can graduate to seeing independent OPDs. This is also in line with the ACGME recommendations, that's the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education by the American Board of Ophthalmology. So advantages of independent OPD for the resident, they become confident in handling clinical situations, so they may not always be compelled to seek additional training. There are improved diagnostic and examination skills. Intervention on their own patients is one way to ensure examination management follow-up skills are up to the mark. Improved soft skills, communication with patients, relatives, staff, colleagues, seniors, cross-consultations and interspecialties is improved. They cultivate more interest in the field, they learn proper application of the preferred practice pattern, and the final goal of taking care of 80 to 90% of patients as primary care ophthalmologists can be achieved. They learn how to go about teamwork, understand firsthand the importance of ethics, informed consent, and patient participation. For the patients, it leads to a more thorough history taking, cross-checking of examination findings, and reduced waiting time. For the institute, there is a lesser waiting time, more thorough detailed evaluation of the patients, and the day-to-day intricacies and hassles can be managed well with the help of the residents if they are more involved. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the IT team is very poor. Either the time is not displayed or the time is displayed at a very wrong time. So the allotted time is 4 minutes for each participant, but you're not displaying. So very poor IT team. The organizer has to take care. We invite the next speaker.
Yeah, Dr. Himadri Chaudhary will be speaking on independent OPD patients for residents not to see. May I request the next speaker, Dr. Kamaljeet Singh, to be ready. And Bhaiya, is it possible आप यहाँ पे time दिखाएं?
Tick, no problem.
It is 4 minutes for each speakers. Yes.
A very good morning to one and all present here. I'd like to first thank Dr. Partha Biswas sir for giving me this opportunity. I'll be talking on independent OPD patient for residents not to see. And my previous speaker has kind of made my work easy by saying that they should be only given guarded independence, not complete independence. So I have no financial interest. So we have all heard practice makes a man perfect. That the main idea being if you keep on doing the same thing again and again, eventually you will learn how to do it very well. But is it really true? Is it really correct? Okay, let's have a look at this gentleman and let's see what he's trying to do. He's trying to pick up his toys and put it in a box, but he's failing even after multiple attempts. So now he has tried to do the same thing over and over again. This is his 4th or 5th attempt. And he just doesn't learn. Eventually, he keeps on doing it, and finally, he just falls down. So this is a complete fail. PG trainees are very similar. They do not realize what kind of mistakes they're making. They keep on doing the same thing over and over again. So this is a representative case. A 52-year-old female patient presented with dimness of vision in both eyes for the past 4 months. And this was the fundus photograph. So postgraduate trainee evaluated the patient and diagnosed it as glaucomatous optic atrophy, started the patient on anti-glaucoma medication, and just disposed of the patient. The patient came back after a month. The intraocular pressures were fairly normal, and the patient was continued on anti-glaucoma medication, again by the same PG trainee, and the patient was again disposed of. Finally, after 2 months, the patient was seen by a consultant, and a diagnosis of partial optic atrophy was made, and a CT scan was then advised. Here is what we saw on the CT scan. There was a large meningioma, and finally the patient was referred to a neurosurgeon. Here, a simple mistake could have actually caused fatality. So this is not a problem only in India. All over the world, multiple studies have been done, and almost all of these studies have shown that trainee doctors make the maximum number of errors, even though they do the majority of the prescribing. So, while clinical exposure is necessary, it must not be at the cost of our patients. We need to go back to the Guru Shishya Parampara. We have to train the patient. We have to be patient with them. The PG trees will make mistakes, but if we are with them, if we keep on teaching them, they will eventually learn, and they will definitely do a good job when they're out there doing work independently in the future. So practice makes a man perfect is not correct or incomplete. Only perfect practice makes a man perfect. And for perfect practice, there has to be a guardian who is with the PG trainee all the time to tell them what is correct and what is not. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, sir. We'll go to the next topic, retinoscopy and refraction by Dr. Kamaljeet Singh, a must.
And may I also request the next speaker, Dr. Kiran Kumar Nokala. Are you here? To be ready in this podium.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a very interesting topic, actually, talking about retinoscopy in today's world. When we were students, we used to have a retinoscope like this. And many of us seniors have done retinoscopy with this plane mirror and concave mirror. And later on, we switched over to streak. And then came the auto-ref. So what is the difference between retinoscopy? Since we have learned all these things in our last 30 years, we have done all these steps, we have gone through this. Today I find that the postgraduates, they want an optometrist with them. When they go on to the practice, they say that this is not our job. Doing refraction is not our job. Optometrist will do. And many a time, when they go into practice, what they see is that he is the consultant and the optometrist is sitting with him. Optometrist has 25 patients. He makes glasses also, and he earns more than the consultant who is waiting for a cataract to come. So that sort of situation today is there. I find that those trained for retina, they don't know how to do a good refraction. So doing retinoscopy is very, very important. And I don't need to tell how to do the retinoscopy here. So this has been seen that when you have auto-ref versus retinoscopy scenario, in non-cycloplegic conditions, you will find that many a time it gives you more negative values. So it becomes difficult many a times to compare with retinoscopy, and there are several studies which tell that the retinoscopy is more accurate than the auto-refraction. So especially in non-cycloplegic refraction. There are other studies also which tell that the auto-ref gives you minus overcorrection. So many a time it gives you -5 and you have to give him glasses -3, and what the optometrist does is that he puts -5 lens and he gives the glasses because the patient can see with the -5 also with -3. So the subjective testing has not been done, and the auto-ref number that has been given is not right. So many a time we fail, and the surgeon is the culprit then, not the optometrist that you have. So the surgeon should know how to do a good retinoscopy, and also how to understand the auto-ref. In hypermetropia, on the other hand, it gives lesser value. So this should be understood, and especially in children. When you are doing in children, the accommodation plays a role, and when accommodation plays a role, then you have to do a good retinoscopy after dilation. And it has been found that after dilation, if you do auto-ref and retinoscopy, usually in adults, the difference is not there between the retinoscopy and auto-ref. But if you simply do in children, because the attention is required, they need some time to fix at the auto-ref, then you can get the refraction. So the refractive error is not proper, and many a time you fail in giving a proper glass. And many a time in the two eyes you do auto-ref, the readings would be different, whereas on retinoscopy you will find they are the same, so binocularity gets disturbed. So you must know retinoscopy, and then you can progress on to the auto-ref, which is a good screening device which can be used there. And in individual practice, one must learn to do retinoscope. So during residency, this is very, very important to learn retinoscopy, and then you can think of doing it on auto-ref. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Retinoscopy just optional by Dr. Kiran Kumar.
At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Partha Biswas sir for giving me this opportunity, and respected convener and chair. This is my first talk on AOS podium, so a little bit excited and nervous. So retinoscopy and refraction by a resident is just optional. It's because So advantages of automated refraction is it's a small learning curve, so very easily everybody can done. Not only a medical person, non-medical person also, if with little bit training, he can do it. And patient satisfaction levels is extremely high when compared to do with a retinoscope, with a strict retinoscope rather than if you do it auto ref, patient satisfaction will be more. And in all age groups, starting from pediatric age group, more than 2.5 years to up to age of 90 years or something, we can do an AR, and it is very fast and accurate with the latest machines available right now in the market. And reproducibility is one of the biggest advantages. So if you do it today or tomorrow, day after tomorrow, in the same conditions, it will give the same result for the same mission. And we can do it in dim light and both in very light conditions also. Whereas strict retinoscope which is not possible in light conditions, we need a dark room. So it doesn't possible, especially if you want to do a strict retinoscope in a mass screening camps, it's not possible. But with AR, we can do it in a camps and in office also. It's very much useful. There is no inter-observer variation. If I do, or my colleague do, or my optometrist do, it will give the same result. Whereas in the strict retinoscope, it depends. Inter-observer variation will be there. And now with the available of latest portable auto refs, we can do it in pediatric age group who are not cooperative also. With these advantages, we have auto ref is must in every clinic right now. We see some clinical scenarios. So right eye it is pseudophakic eye with and left eye is a cataract. So if left eye, if cataract is there, it will not give results. That means it will display error. We can directly give prescription based on AR in case of pseudophakic eyes. And another scenario is a 20 years female who is already using glasses, came for review, and with the reading of AR itself, we can directly give prescription with not much difference from AR to SV. And a 12 years old female with complaining of defective vision and little bit headache while reading. Her vision is 6/9 in both eyes. With the dilated and with the dilatation, cyclopent diffraction, we can do an PMT and do fogging, and then we can diagnose the condition as excessive accommodation. And again, so AR not only for undilated but for both dilated also we can do. And because the main disadvantage of retinoscopy, it has long learning curve. Almost it takes 2 to 3 years for to do good retinoscopy, and even more than that also. It's a time-consuming process. It takes much time. So in a busy OPD, we cannot do like that. And in a small people, we cannot do in retinoscopy, especially in bright conditions. And because I took biology, because I'm afraid of maths, but still retinoscopy is one area where it comes to calculations, plus, minus, distance, drug, age, everything. And there are a lot of inter-observer variations will be there. And only the few limitations is pediatric age group and some cost. There are few conditions like PCO and cataract, and this one is pterygium. We cannot get good with AR, but in such scenarios, and we have to depend upon our previous glasses prescription. And one biggest advantage, I love AR because there is one reading called PD. This is PD, that is called pupillary distance. That is 2 pupillary distance. When I joined my residency, I am not getting binocular single vision. BSV is not there. I am always using single eye. Why? Because all my senior PGs and my colleagues are only, they are having females, and their PD is only 60 to 64. But when I see with that one, I am using always monocular vision in both slit lamp examination and also in microscope. But when I do my own PD, it was 72. So all these days, so PD is coming. So when I switched it to, when I wide open the binoculars and I adjusted the PD for 72, then I got binocular single vision. My performance improved. So I love this here because it gives PD.
Okay.
So take home message is
it's
it's a good.
New information. We can just find out the
So
PD for the
is
female.
it good
and
for
the
office
male,
and mass screening?
Male residents or the female? Okay, we don't want it to continue with the same topic. Thank you, sir. You can go ahead. We invite Dr. Nahid Akhtar is available here. If not, I invite Madam Dr. Hamiti Chowdhury to present the topic on prescribing OPD, just option.
छोड़ दो ना।
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Dr. Partho Biswas for giving me a chance to be a part of this ARC session. I'll be speaking on prescribing in OPD, just optional. Our study was conducted in Lucknow among the first-year postgraduate students to know about their prescription writing knowledge. And this is the result of the study. 48% have said that their knowledge of prescription writing is average. 58% said that they are not prepared to prescribe safely, and another 62% undergraduate trainees doing the first year PGT said that they are not ready to prescribe rationally. So when a PG is in the first year, then there needs to have a uniformity in the curriculum in all teaching institute, and it should encompass pharmacology, optical dispensing, but then we cannot give the responsibility to the PG to write the prescription. Now he has come in the second year. He should be able to do the workup independently, also learn about the refraction, but then the patients should be disposed by the faculty. Now the PG has come to the third year and his mind is all full with theses, investigations, OTs, diagnostics. So by that third year, he should have learned to dispense under the guidance of senior faculty. He must have learned prescribing medicines, refraction, but since the interest of the patient comes first, so it must be optional and not under compulsion. Coming to the evidence, a study conducted in Maharashtra about the drug prescription behavior, and polypharmacy was revealed in 23% of the prescriptions. A similar study in the ophthalmic medication to know about the prescription error, and the errors was maximum number of error was caused by the junior doctors. A similar study done in United Kingdom, they have also shown that drug-related errors, the maximum error was caused here. You can see 100% errors was caused by the junior doctors. So a pharmacology journal, this recommendation was prescribed. The prescription, after it is being written by the junior doctors, goes to the senior doctors. The senior doctors does a review of the prescription, and then the prescription goes to the patient. So what are the common errors a postgraduate trainee is likely to do in an ophthalmic OPD? They have a tendency to jump straight to antibiotic for any red eye. So a red eye could be anything but conjunctivitis. It could be a dry eye, allergy, episcleritis. PGs often miss primary angle closure suspect, and then they land up in angle closure glaucoma. They also have a habit or maybe a tendency to write steroid in any infective condition, and it could give very bad results. Cases of headache, diplopia, which needs thorough workup, might be just missed by a postgraduate trainee because he might have just written a paracetamol for a headache patient. Cases like idiopathic intracranial hypertension is very likely to be missed by a PG student. Flashes and floaters again needs a very methodical indirect ophthalmoscopy, and he just might not dispose the patient by writing a maybe NSAID. So this again needs very thorough follow-up and workup. Orbital cellulitis is again something which a PG is likely to miss. So I'd like to conclude that postgraduate students must be given sufficient knowledge of writing the prescription, but at all times it must be supervised because the interest of the patient comes first, and we cannot compromise the patient's safety. Thank you very much for your kind hearing.
Thank you, madam. So with this, we wind up this session. We start with the discussion. So Dr. Pannisaselam, sir, any comments?
For any postgraduate center, the challenge is balancing between the patient safety and enhancing the competence of the resident. It's always a challenge, and the main objective should be the postgraduate resident should start his practice after residency. So this is the aim of the objective. So the postgraduate should be integrated, incorporated in the patient flow. It should be structured in such a way he is monitored throughout, so he gains confidence, not at the expense of the patient safety. So I always have in my center, we have an active alumni association where we monitor what they do after this surgery. And the feedback that we get, we are able to change the system so that the competence is enhanced. This is what I say. All the topics are good, and active participation of the postgraduate is a must. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Now the prescribing in the OPD, as Dr. Hamiti madam said, it will be a structured, the first years, what they should do in the second year resident and the third year resident. Sir. And I think she has elaborately said about that. Regarding the proficiency in diagnosis, I don't know how multiple equipments can justify the proficiency in diagnosis. Dr. Anuradha Chandran. As Dr. Sheikh said, we have a limited instrument, the basic like the indirect ophthalmoscope, the 90D lens and the 20D lenses will do more justification for the PGs in diagnosing the common errors in ophthalmology. Dr. Anuradha, the multiple equipments, the cost effectiveness, the placement of the instruments, now the interpretations, on the perimeter, the Octopus 901, 301, each one is having different type of interpretations are coming up. And so Zeiss model is being outdated, so many models are being outdated also now. After 2 or 3 years, they said that this is outdated, you go for the next version. That way, OPD, how the multiple equipments can increase the proficiency?
Sir, first of all, we have to be updated with the technology. If the technology is changing, we should also know how to get updated with the technology.
That's fine,
if
but in the OPD?
In the OPD, for example, you have sent a patient for a OCT. Okay, you used to send it for glaucoma evaluation. So if you don't know the latest OCT, how to interpret it, then multiple instruments will help you to know that how each of the instrument interprets the data. For example, what I had given in my presentation is the IOL master, a manual keratometer, and a immersion OcuScan. So we used to do a manual keratometer and OcuScan in every patient. But when you are doing a toric or you are considering a patient for a multifocal, you should also know how to do a IOL master, because the anterior chamber depth is going to make a difference in that patient. So you need to know all the instruments. You cannot say, okay, I will know only 90D and I will know only direct
the topic is about the proficiency diagnosis, availability of the all equipments in the OPD. That is the topic given.
Yes, sir.
And,
So
it is actually proficiency by residents. So it is not possible for a resident to learn all the equipments.
But
But
he
for
should be
residents,
exposed to all
I
the
would go for
instruments.
basic equipments only. because
Ma'am, actually,
Yes, what you said is correct.
Yes, sir.
You said is correct, master, but for the residents,
yesterday my resident was presenting a case.
Yes, sir.
What he did was that he did a OCT disc,
Yes, sir.
and the OCT disc, if you do, the findings are entirely different from what you see.
Yes, sir.
So he was presenting what is there in the OCT disc. He had not seen the fundus properly. So many a time it's very, very important to have some clinical impression in your mind, then you go on to.
Definitely, sir.
And
first,
it's important to learn every instrument.
Yes, sir. That is the idea of being in favor of combined multiple instruments.
Yeah, thank you. And regarding the concept maps and patient counseling, everything, I think Dr. Loganathan will be knowing this. We have got this curriculum-based learning nowadays by the MC has implemented from this year onwards, that is from the 2019 August batch MBBS ophthalmology. We have got this curriculum-based learning. So for all over India, all medical colleges, all ophthalmology department, we have a structured course. May 1st, what they should learn in the OPD, what they should learn. This is the same whether it is in Assam or in Bangalore like that. It's very difficult to implement all over India, but I think this is the first year they are going to implement. But regarding the PG level, we are just finalize the draft. Maybe next year we are going to have the structured program. So all over India, all medical colleges, whether it is private or a government medical colleges, will have a structured program. So.
Okay, I think we are running short. Yeah.
And the only thing about this retinoscopy, the females, Dr. Kiran Kumar was telling about the PG female, I don't understand those points. The female residents, how the PD distance is differing and how you are not able to have a binocular single vision in front of the female residents.
My point is, I'm always seeing with
you
the
said
wrong
that
IPD,
in
sir.
most of the, of course, in ophthalmology, most of them are female residents.
Yes, sir.
Then how come the female residents made you to not to have a binocular?
Because they will see something in slit lamp and ask me to see. But when I see the same with IPD, I cannot get that binocular single vision.
But
because
you have to change the eyes.
No, doctor. See, this is a very serious program that we are conducting for the enhancement of the PGs. Don't pass such irresponsible and illogical comments about the female. Project, you please, maybe this is your first presentation, you see to that you don't bring such awkward comments in front of the podium and all. Please, okay? This is your take-home message.
Yes,
thank you, doctor.
I'm sorry that I am not.
Years to learn retinoscopy.
Yes, that is also very degrading. See, we are in the teaching institution. I am from the RIO, I am the unit professor. And we know we have a structured program, and the first year the residence is complete. I think most of the professors available here will accept with me, including Paneerselvam sir, who is having DNB. So this is, and Loganathan also.
One day if your AR is not working, what will you do at your clinic?
And Loganathan, if we start questioning you, then you can't, you can't. I think before you deliver your slides in such a forum, you please show to your seniors.
Excuse me, sir.
Okay?
Would really request you because
Madam,
it's
already
an hour
the time
session.
is running short.
No, but it was an hour session. The others are waiting.
Thank you. Thank
It's
you
already
for all the participants. It's a wonderful discussion.
Thank you so much and sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to call the